The ranch stood still in the waning light of the evening, the golden hues of the setting sun casting long shadows across the land. David Miller had returned, though not by choice. He had nowhere else to go. The years of service, the endless operations, and the horrors of war had drained him, leaving him with nothing but the weight of his memories and the void left by his wife's passing. The quiet, familiar expanse of his family's ranch, though weathered by time, was still his only refuge. As the truck made its slow way toward the house, the sound of gravel crunching under the tires was the only noise that dared disturb the silence. The farm, once alive with laughter, had been abandoned for far too long. Now it stood as a monument to the past, a place that reminded him of better times when life had been simple and love had been shared. But love was now a ghost. David's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his fingers calloused and worn from decades of soldiering. The deep lines on his face told stories of battles fought, both on the field and within himself. He had lost much: his wife, his youth, his comrades, but the hardest loss of all had been the unspoken death of his partner in arms, Max. It wasn't until he was walking through the barn, his boots dragging through the dust and hay, that he heard it. A faint, distant whimper, a sound he had long forgotten. He paused, his heart racing. The barn was silent save for the occasional rustle of the wind and the creaking of old wooden beams. His eyes scanned the dimly lit space, searching for the source. Then, in the farthest corner, hidden beneath a pile of discarded tools and broken crates, he saw him. Max. Older now, his fur matted and patches of it missing, but unmistakable. David's breath caught in his throat. He could hardly believe his eyes. He had buried the memory of Max years ago, convinced that his loyal companion had been lost in that explosion, presumed dead. Yet here he was, still clinging to life. "Max?" David whispered. His voice cracked with emotion. The dog's head lifted slightly, and for a moment, they stared at one another, man and animal, bound by a shared past, each holding onto the other like a life raft in a sea of memories. The memories of war hit David like a wave, and for a moment, he was back there again, back in the heat of battle, where every second felt like an eternity. Max had been his constant, his silent partner in the chaos. Together, they had faced dangers that most men would never understand. There had been missions where Max's nose saved lives, sniffing out hidden explosives before they could detonate, alerting the team to danger, long before it was visible. One mission in particular stood out: an ambush, a desperate scramble for safety, and Max, with his sharp instincts, had saved their lives. He had tackled a soldier out of the way just as an IED exploded, throwing them both to the ground. The force of the blast had nearly killed them, but Max had survived. As always, Max had survived. David could still hear the sound of the blast in his ears, feel the heat on his skin, and see Max's bloodied form beside him, still willing to fight, still willing to stay. "Stay, boy," David had said, his voice calm, amidst the chaos. "Stay with me." Max had stayed. Max always stayed. Years had passed since that mission, and David had been told that Max had died in the explosion. He had mourned him, buried the grief deep in his chest, and moved on. But fate, as it often does, had its own plans. Max had not died. No, Max had survived, though barely. Found by local villagers and taken to a shelter, the dog had been nursed back to health. But Max, with his sharp instincts, had never forgotten David. Through twists of fate, through the labyrinth of systems that had failed him, Max had found his way back. It wasn't clear how he had done it. It wasn't clear how a dog, half-starved and battered, could navigate the world without direction. But somehow, Max had known where to go. The same bond that had tied them together in the battlefield now led him home. The veterinarian's office was cold, clinical, and smelled of antiseptic. Max lay on the examination table, his body a shell of its former self. His bones were thin and frail, his coat patchy and rough. Dr. Rachel Brooks, a kind-hearted woman with a steady hand, gently examined Max, her fingers pressing against his. "Ribs feeling the weakness beneath, severe malnutrition," she said softly, her voice the only comfort in the sterile room. "High's older than you think, and arthritis is advanced. He's been through more than most dogs, more than most people. David nodded, his face hard with determination. He hadn't brought Max here to be told how bad it was. He had brought him here because no matter what, he was going to take care of him. He wasn't going to leave him behind again. The road to recovery would be long, slow, but David was willing to take that time. He would do whatever it took. He owed Max that much, if nothing else. One night, as the crisp autumn air chilled the bones, David collapsed in the barn. His chest tightened, the pain unbearable. His vision blurred and the world began to spin. He fell to the cold ground, unable to call out, unable to move. Max, always alert, stirred from his resting place nearby. He looked up, sensing something was wrong. It didn't take long for the old dog to realize that his partner was in danger. Max's training kicked in, instincts honed over years of service. Without hesitation, he sprang into action. The old farm bell, a relic from a time when people would use it to call help or alert neighbors, was within reach. Max, with surprising precision, grabbed the rope in his teeth and tugged hard, ringing the bell relentlessly. It worked. The sound echoed through the ranch, waking the neighbors and calling for help. Within minutes, someone arrived. The ambulance was on its way. David's heart had stopped, but Max's loyalty had not. It was Max who saved him, just as Max had saved him so many times before. The news spread quickly. A veteran soldier and his war dog, reunited after years of separation. The story of their bond, of their loyalty to each other, captured the hearts of many. People rallied behind them, inspired by their unwavering connection. A foundation was established to support retired military dogs, and Max's story became a beacon of hope for others. At a ceremony honoring military dogs, Max was awarded a medal for his years of service. The crowd cheered, but David stood quietly. Beside him, his hand resting on the dog's worn back. Max had been more than a dog. He had been a partner, a savior, and a friend. David couldn't speak of the bond they shared. Words were never enough. But the moment Max received his medal, David knew that in a way they had both been honored. They had both fought the same battles, and together they had survived. The sun was setting, casting its golden light over the ranch as David and Max sat side by side on the porch. The years had been hard, but now, in the quiet of the evening, there was peace. The old dog, his head resting on David's knee, breathed steadily. The soldier, once a man broken by the past, felt the weight of that past lift, if only for a moment. They had been through so much, through the pain of war, the losses that came with it, and the years of separation. But now, together, they had found something new, a quiet peace that came from knowing they had each other. They sat in silence, side by side, watching the sun sink lower into the horizon. It was the first time in a long while that David felt he wasn't alone. He wasn't sure how much time they had left, but for now it didn't matter. They had survived. Together. Seasons passed, each one carrying a subtle reminder of the years that had slipped by. The winter snow blanketed the ranch in white, transforming the landscape into something serene, almost untouched. It was a season that spoke of quiet nights by the fire and the warmth of companionship. David and Max had become two souls intertwined with the rhythms of the land. As the cold winds blew through the cracks of the barn, the two of them would sit together, side by side, watching the world outside. David's hands, now a little steadier than before, would stroke the dog's back, while Max, his muzzle now gray and his movements slower, would rest his head on David's knee. Their days were simple, filling the troughs with grain, mending fences, repairing the old barn. But there was something unspoken between them, something deeper than words could describe. Max's body had grown frail, his bones creaking under the weight of old age. He could no longer run as he once had, but his presence was enough. In his eyes, David could still see the sharpness, the readiness of the soldier Max had once been. He was not the same dog who had stormed the battlefield, but he was still loyal, still present. David, too, had changed. The man who had returned broken with the weight of war and loss on his shoulders had found something he hadn't expected: peace. It was the kind of peace that came not from forgetting, but from remembering and healing. Together, he and Max had healed, each drawing strength from the other. One afternoon, David found himself sitting outside, his gaze following the distant line of the horizon. The golden sun bathed the land in warmth, and the wind was soft, gentle. Max lay beside him, resting his head on David's boots, as they had done so many times before. The air smelled of the earth, of hay and fresh grass, a reminder of simpler times. "Do you remember when we used to run together?" David asked, softly, as if Max could understand. "Back when you could outrun me with ease. I didn't think I'd ever see you slow down." Max lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting David's with a gaze that held both wisdom and something else, something deeper. It was as if the dog, in his quiet way, was acknowledging the change, the passing of time. His tail gave a gentle swish, the movement slow but deliberate. David smiled and reached down, rubbing Max's ears. The dog's fur was softer now, thinner than it had been in the past, but there was still a sense of strength beneath it. The strength of a warrior, the strength of a friend. It was on a particularly stormy night that their bond would be tested once again. The skies had darkened quickly, the storm clouds rolling in with a ferocity that seemed to shake the very earth beneath them. The wind howled as it tore through the trees, and the rain poured down in sheets. The barn creaked under the pressure of the storm, its old timbers groaning as though they, too, were trying to withstand the weight of the tempest. David was inside, trying to secure the windows when he heard the faint sound of scratching at the door. It was Max, his tail tucked between his legs, eyes wide with fear. The storm had always unsettled him, even in his prime, but now, weakened and frail, it seemed to be too much for him. David knelt beside the dog, his hands steady despite the chaos outside. "It's all right, Max. You're safe here." He stroked the dog's back, his heart heavy with the knowledge that time was slipping away. Max curled up next to him, his head resting on David's lap as the storm raged on outside. In that moment, the two of them found comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about holding on to the moments that mattered, the quiet moments, the small moments. The storm passed by the next morning, leaving the ranch battered but intact. The sun shone through the clouds, casting a soft light over the land. David and Max, though both weary from the night's ordeal, remained together, the unspoken understanding between them stronger than ever. It was only a matter of time before their story, Max and David's, began to attract attention. The media, always hungry for a heartwarming story, picked up on the tale of the war hero and his loyal dog. Reporters began to arrive, their cameras flashing as they captured the moments of reunion and recovery. The once quiet life of the ranch had been turned into a small media frenzy. But David didn't mind. The attention, while overwhelming at times, also helped raise awareness about the sacrifices made by military dogs and their handlers. The non-profit foundation dedicated to helping retired military dogs flourished, providing resources and care for dogs like Max, who had served and protected their country. At a ceremony held in their honor, Max was presented with a medal for his years of service. The crowd applauded as David stood beside him, his heart swelling with pride. He had never imagined such a day, but here it was a testament to the bond they had shared, to the sacrifices they had both made. As the years continued to slip by, Max's health began to decline more rapidly. His once bright eyes grew cloudy, and his steps, once quick and sure, became slower and more labored. David watched as the dog he had once relied on with all his heart grew weaker. One quiet evening, as the golden light of dusk bathed the ranch, in warmth, David found himself sitting by the fire, Max resting at his feet. The dog's breathing was shallow, his body still, as if he was gathering his strength for something. David knew that the time was near, that time was finally catching up with them both. "You've been with me through it all, Max," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Through the war, through the pain, through the quiet. You've been my constant, and I don't know what I would have done without you." Max's tail gave a small, soft thump against the floor, as if to say, "I'm here, always." That night, Max slept beside David, the two of them sharing the kind of silence that only true understanding could bring. It was a peace that transcended words, a peace that only came after years of battle, both external and internal. The next morning, as the first rays of dawn touched the earth, Max passed away quietly, his body at rest. He had given everything he had, and now he was finally free. David stood over him, his heart heavy with grief, but also full of gratitude. Max had been his hero, his companion, his soldier, and now he was gone. But the bond they had shared could never be broken. Not by time, not by death. It lived on in every memory, in every silent moment they had shared. David knew that life would continue. He would keep going just as Max had always done. The ranch would remain, and though the world had changed, the lessons of loyalty, love, and sacrifice would never be forgotten. David stood at the edge of the field, the wind brushing against his face, and looked out at the horizon. The ranch was quiet once again, the bustle of the world fading into the background. But there was something in the air, a sense of peace, of completion. Max was gone, but his spirit lived on in the land, in the memories, and in David's heart. The bond they shared was something eternal, something that would never be forgotten. It was a bond forged in the fires of war, in the quiet moments of recovery, and in the shared understanding between two souls who had saved each other. David sat down on the porch, the wind soft around him, and felt the weight of the years lift. Just a little. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel the quiet, to remember the love and the loyalty that had shaped his life. And as the sun set on the land they had once shared, David smiled, knowing that the legacy of Max, the loyal war dog, the steadfast companion, would live on, forever etched in his heart. As the days moved on, David found himself slowly adapting to the silence. The house, once filled with the rhythm of Max's footsteps and the soft sound of his breathing, now felt empty. But in that emptiness, David had discovered a new kind of peace, one that came not from forgetting, but from embracing the lessons the past had given him. One morning, as the sun rose over the South Dakota plains, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, David found himself standing by the old barn, gazing out over the land he had fought so hard to return to. His hand, now weathered by age and experience, brushed against the worn wood of the barn door. Memories of battles fought and won, both in war and in life, filling his mind. He missed Max, more than he could ever put into words. But he knew, deep in his heart, that it was time to let go. David made his way to the far corner of the ranch, where the grass was thick and lush, the earth soft beneath his boots. It was the spot where he and Max had spent countless afternoons walking, their quiet companionship filling the air. He had buried Max there, beneath the great oak tree that had stood watch over the ranch for generations, a silent sentinel to the lives that had come and gone. Sitting down on the grass, David closed his eyes, letting the wind brush against his face. It was the same breeze that had swept through the fields when he had first returned to this place, and it felt as though Max was still with him, lingering in the gentle rustling of the leaves. "I promised you I would never forget," David whispered softly into the wind, his voice a quiet prayer to the memory of his friend. "And I never will." He sat there for a long time, feeling the weight of time and memory press against his chest, but also a deep sense of gratitude. He had known love. He had known loyalty. And in return, he had given both in equal measure. As the seasons turned, once more David returned to the daily rhythms of life. The barn was repaired, the fences mended, and the land, though still touched by the marks of time, was alive with the growth of new things. There were no more flashbulbs of cameras or the buzz of media attention. The world had moved on as it always did. But David had come to understand something that eluded. Most life was not about the accolades, the recognition, or the noise of the outside world. It was about the quiet moments, the unspoken bonds that defined the essence of who we were. David continued caring for the land with the same dedication he had once given to Max, finding solace in the routine and the acts of nurturing something that couldn't be replaced. Over time, the grief began to heal, not by forgetting, but through remembrance. He learned that healing meant carrying the past with him, embracing it and moving forward. One evening, as the sky turned twilight, David saw a young dog with fur the color of the evening sky. The dog approached him cautiously, sitting at his feet. David realized it wasn't Max, but it was exactly what he needed, a companion to walk with him in the quiet days ahead. Years later, as David sat on the porch with the dog at his feet, he reflected on how far he had come. He had started his journey broken by war and loss, but through Max's loyalty, he found strength. Now, with the new dog by his side, he understood that Max's spirit lived on in the way he lived his life, carrying the lessons of love and loyalty. As the stars flickered above, David smiled, knowing that the bond he shared with Max would never be broken, and that his heart would always remember. And that's the end of our story, folks. If you enjoyed the tale of loyalty, love, and healing between David and Max, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and remember, sometimes the most meaningful bonds in life are the quiet ones. Until next time, take care and keep the love alive.